You're right about the target length and pacing for watch time. Below is the full, continuous story in natural American English, structured for a 2,225-minute narration, with a clear ending and a strong discussion invite at the end. All character names are changed from the source material. The box with the red corners. Have you ever received a birthday present that felt wrong the second you touched it? Not disappointing wrong. Like the gift itself was studying you, weighing you, deciding something you didn't agree to. I used to want to be a ventriloquist. I used to love the illusion of a voice coming from a face that wasn't mine. Then a present arrived in a wooden box with red metal corners. And I learned that sometimes the voice you throw doesn't come back. My name is Logan Pierce. I turned 13 the night this started. My dad, Marshall, worked nights at the county hospital in a small Midwestern city that has one mall, 2 stoplights through downtown, and more auto shops than restaurants. My mom died when I was 10. Heart failure, the kind that sneaks up, taking a breath here and there until the world goes quiet. Since then, Dad had the reflex of replacing pain with purchases. He'd bring home things he couldn't afford, a bike I didn't ride because I hated the stairs on our street, a gaming console that made me nauseous after 20 minutes, the finest noise-canceling headphones for a kid who mostly wanted to hear someone else in the house. What I wanted was a new mattress. The one in my room felt like a bag of rocks. I told Dad. He'd said soon. The way adults say maybe to make themselves feel better. On the last evening before my birthday, Dad came home an hour late, the cold night air following him through the door. He wasn't carrying groceries. He was lugging a box nearly the size of a toddler's coffin. The wood was smooth, dense, smelling like old varnish. The edges of the lid wore reddish metal like a thin armor copper. Maybe a faint nick crossed the top as if someone had tried to pry it open with a screwdriver and changed their mind. "Help me with this." "Lo," he said. His voice had the half-tired, half-proud sound of a man who wants the reveal to land. We set the box on the coffee table. I rubbed at the metal with my thumb. It felt warmer than the wood. "What's in it?" I asked. "It's a surprise," he said. "Happy early birthday." "How much did it cost?" He shook his head. "Not your worry." "Expensive." Then, my stomach sank. Whatever was inside would mean we'd eat more spaghetti for a month, and Dad would say things like, "We're making it work," while counting bills at the dining table. After he went a shower, I hovered by the box. A thin seam traced where lid met body, too precise for something that looked handmade. I leaned in. For a moment, I thought I heard the faintest tap from inside, like a fingernail against wood. I told myself it was the heating kicking on. I told myself a lot of things that year. I went to bed and rehearsed not being ungrateful. I stared at the ceiling. The mattress poked my ribs. The house made its small house noises. And then the tapping returned, steady and thin, like a metronome someone was holding under a pillow. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the vents or the hallway. I followed it barefoot across the cold floor. In the living room, moonlight made a silver stripe across the coffee table. The tapping came from the box. I stood there, hand on the lid. I told myself I was being stupid. Then I cracked the box open. At first, all I saw was darkness and the smell of old cloth. Then, as my eyes adjusted, 2 deep brown eyes looked back. Not painted eyes. What eyes? Animal eyes. The face around them was wrong, too long through the snout, but with a human mouth. I jerked back. The lid slammed. The room pinwheeled as if I'd been spun around. When I woke, my cheek was stuck to the carpet and dawn was crawling across the floor. Dad nudged me with his socked foot. "Why are you sleeping on the rug, bud?" I sat up too fast. The room swam. The box sat there as polite as furniture. I was waiting, I said, and hated how it sounded. "Can I open it now?" He rubbed his hands together. Go ahead. The lid creaked. Inside lay a ventriloquist dummy stretched as if napping. The skin was pale plastic, shiny in the light. The jaw, the lower half of the face, was detached and resting beside it, painted with a red lip. The cheeks were round as fruit. Dark brown synthetic hair curled on the scalp. The hands were plastic too, small and curled. The head and hands were taped to a soft fabric body, the tape gone yellow with age. What do you think? Dad asked, and I heard that same almost frantic hope he'd had for 3 years. I love it. I lied, then realized it wasn't fully a lie. I had loved this once. In 4th grade, I did a school talent show. Learned to keep my lips still while the little head on my knee stole the audience. I hadn't been a comedian. Exactly, more a kid with a trick. But I remembered the light feeling when it worked. A thin string ran through a hole beneath the top jaw, where it would be pulled from the back of the head. I threaded it through, tied a knot above the jaw hinge. The knot sat thick and proud like a bead. I tugged the string. The jaw opened, then hung too long, the lower lip slipping, giving the dummy a grin that felt dislocated from kindness. What's his name? Dad asked. I glanced at the ridiculous chin. Mr. Lank, I said, because of the long jaw. Dad laughed. It was a tired laugh that still found its way to the corners of his eyes. Mr. Lank it is. I placed the dummy on my knee and let my throat relax. Well, hello, Mr. Pierce, I said in a rasp that didn't touch my lips. Do you mind if I stay a while? Any friend of Logan's is a friend of mine, Dad said, and the warmth in his voice made me wish I'd meant more of my words. The doorbell rang. The little party Dad had promised was starting. First came my mom's brother, Uncle Brent, a white-collar type who never took off his blazer and had hair the shade of straw. He hugged me and asked how old I was in a tone like he was testing the number for quality. Then my 2 closest friends arrived, Riley, who could talk for an hour about haunted lighthouses and cursed paintings, and Paul, whose whole personality was being game for anything except the supernatural. We ate grocery store cake, and Dad told the same story he always told about Mom's terrible pancakes, and we laughed because the ritual of laughter is a way of keeping people alive. Uncle Brent picked up Mr. Lank and tugged on the string a little too hard. The jaw clacked, smiled, and then popped clean off, landing on his foot. He swore and hopped backward. I scooped up the jaw and reached for the string to reattach it. That was when I noticed the odd thing. The knot I'd tied was too big to pass back through the hole. By friction alone, it couldn't have slipped. I rubbed at it. The cotton held. There was only one way for the jaw to have fallen. Someone would have had to unhook it. By late afternoon, the house was quiet again. Dad's phone rang. He stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, face shifting to that work mask he wore so well. I've got to go, he said, guilty about it just like every other time. I'll be back late. Want me to save you some cake? I asked, and he said please, as if cake were dignity. Uncle Brent lingered. I did a few minutes of ventriloquism, and he clapped too loudly. And then he left too, promising to send me a proper present once the bonus hit. I rolled my eyes where he couldn't see and took Mr. Lank to the living room. I went to the bathroom and came back, and the coffee table was empty. Great, I muttered. I checked the couch, under the couch, the kitchen, even Dad's room. Then from the living room came a hard bang like a trunk throwing itself against a wall. The box with the red corners, the one Mr. Lank had arrived in, sat against the opposite wall now, several feet from where it had been. I hadn't moved it. Dad hadn't. The house was locked. There were no pets. Something crawled down my spine and tapped there like a teaspoon against a glass. I carried the box to my room and put it in the closet. I turned the lock from the outside. Because the lock turned from the outside. The way you lock a broom closet you don't want the cat to get into. I went to bed. The mattress prodded my shoulders. I stared at the ceiling until the texture lines looked like rivers. Then, knock. Not tapping this time. Knock. From the front door. I stepped into the hallway with a kitchen knife. The kind you take out to cut twine and apples, and, if pressed, fear. The peephole showed me the porch light glowing on nothing. I waited. Another knock came this time from behind me. Faint and steady, like fingertips on a wood lid. I opened the door anyway, standing there on the threshold, listening to the cold. The street was dead in the winter dark. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door until the latch settled. Because that's what Dad taught me, yo, lock the house. Even if you're on the stoop. Movement whispered from the hedge. A small hand poked out. Fingers stiff. Palm turned up. Not human. Plastic. Mr. Lank's hand. I snatched it and felt the dead weight of a toy come out of the brush. I forced a laugh that was more a cough. Hilarious. I told the night, telling myself this was Paul or Riley being clever. I turned the knob. It didn't move. I tried the deadbolt. Locked. I hadn't locked it. A second key existed, Dad's. I called out. Dad? Seriously? My phone rang in my pocket. His name. I answered. Buddy, he said, loud enough that the echo of a hospital corridor lived in his words. You home? Don't. Not tonight. What? I mean, are you here? Did you just lock the deadbolt? Logan, I'm at work. Listen, it's about Brent. He just came in. He was attacked in his car around the corner from your place. We're working on him. I looked at the knife in my free hand. It felt childish and huge at the same time. Attacked how? A nurse's voice murmured near the phone and Dad's tone shifted lower. Knife wound. Back of the neck. Car's wrecked. We don't know. The porch seemed to pitch. I stared at the house key inside the door, where I always left it hanging on the hook so I wouldn't lose it. My own stupidity. I'd locked myself out to be safe from an empty street. With my sleeve over the glass, I punched the small pane beside the knob, reached in, and unlocked the deadbolt. When I turned around, I swear I felt breath on the back of my neck, not warm. Exactly. Moist. Like a dog's exhale after a run. I stepped inside and shut the door and found Mr. Lank sitting upright in the box on the coffee table, his jaw resting in his lap like an offering. What are you? I asked. The box snapped shut. There's a logic to fear in a house. First you make it normal, get a drink of water. Turn on the bathroom light. Wash your face. Then you admit the normal isn't working. Then you reach for the ritual's prayer if you have it. Superstition if you don't. I don't know what ritual I chose. Exactly. I just know that my mind leaped over reason and landed in fight. I dreamed I cut the box into 4 pieces with Dad's circular saw. I dreamed I wrapped each piece in chicken wire and weight and dropped them in 4 different lakes. I dreamed fire and salt. I dreamed a thing with a too long snout and brown eyes, the kind of brown that remembers. I woke to Dad shaking me. I was on the floor in the living room. Logan, he said. Hey. My face stung. He frowned and brought a towel to my cheek. The towel came away with blood. Little cuts cross-hatched my temple, as if I'd rolled through thorns. What happened? He asked. I thought of saying it. The truth would have cost me his belief. Lies are a currency kids learn because adults spend them, too. I fell. I said. Last night. Outside. Scraped a bush. The couch is better than my bed. I must have fallen off. You should have said something about the mattress. I'll buy you a new one. He glanced at the clock. As soon as I'm off shift tonight. Today? I said, irrationally desperate. Like a new mattress could change the physics of the house. He kissed my hair. It's 11 at night. Sleep. We'll fix it tomorrow. He headed for his room. The blue light of the TV flicking across the hall. I'm going to put on a show. In my room. The knife I'd carried earlier was sticking blade first into my mattress, right where my ribs would have been. I stared at it until my eyes watered. Then I pulled it out and shoved it under the bed like that could undo the suggestion. In the morning, I called Riley and Paul. I told them everything. The bush, the box moving, the cuts, Uncle Brent, the jaw that fell when it shouldn't. Paul's answer was simple. Nope, I'm out. He hung up so fast I heard his own voice bounce back through the connection. Riley stayed. Do you remember the thing I told you about cursed objects? She asked. Sometimes it's not the object. It's the container, the frame, the box. People think the doll is possessed because eyes are creepy, but the power sits in the house you put it in. I saw it. I said, not a doll. You saw what it wanted you to see. I don't remember deciding to deface Mr. Lank. Maybe I needed to prove he was only plastic. I took a permanent marker and pressed the tip to the bright brown eyes until ink soaked into the grooves and blacked them. I said, you can't see me now, as if trash talk worked on toys. A voice whispered behind my shoulder, close enough that the air moved my ear hair. I don't need eyes to see you, Logan. I swung around. Nobody. When I turned back to the chair, the dummy's mouth was around my forearm. The teeth weren't sharp because there were no teeth. There was only pressure. I screamed and yanked away. The dummy's limbs, which had always hung limp, jerked as if remembering a choreography, arms wide, legs thudding the cushion, torso jerking upright. It stood in the chair. It leaned toward me without moving its feet. I kicked it harder than it deserved, easier than a person, and it toppled backward, smacking the chair back, tumbling to the floor. I didn't think. I ran. I snatched my phone, flung open the front door, and hit the sidewalk. My breath burned. Something splashed behind me. It was raining, the kind that doesn't commit, just mists the world and leaves puddles too shallow for reflections. The sound of the splashing back there was faster than mine. I didn't dare look. The rhythmic clack of a jaw on a string followed, bouncing, like a metronome for panic. I called Riley. She answered on video, and I spun the camera behind me. In the jerking frame, for a second, you could see it, the dummy coming fast, arms swinging strangely loose, its blackened eyes slick with rain. Don't stop, she yelled, and Paul's voice came smaller through her phone. Run, Logan, like a prayer he didn't believe in. Then I didn't hear splashing anymore. I looked back. Mr. Lank lay still in the road. Not a creature. A toy. Soaked and pathetic. I edged toward it, phone shaking in my hand. What did you do to it? Riley asked. Nothing. I reached down and touched the face. The rain smeared the black ink over the eyes into a dark haze. Under the ink, the brown had gone blue. Not paint. Something else. Human blue. Like someone's eyes on a driver's license. It's not the dummy, I said. It's the box. I carried the dummy home. I left it on the bathroom counter and washed it gently. Muddy water running brown down the sink. I taped the head where the tape had peeled. I set it on a towel and patted it dry like a child after a bath. I hate writing that. It looks wrong on the page. It felt right. Then I went to the closet. I took the box by its handles, which I hadn't noticed before, thin, almost hidden. I dragged it out to the patchy grass we called a yard. I found a book of matches in the junk drawer. Dad smoked in college and kept the old habit of grabbing matchbooks from diners. I struck one. The flame looked small against the red-cornered wood. A whisper bled up from the box seam. The way heat talks against metal. Don't, it said. Please. I finally returned. The match burned my fingers. I dropped it, struck another, and pressed it to the old varnish at the corner. Flame caught the way a memory catches at once and slowly. Resin bubbled. Smoke took the air from my lungs and replaced it with the inside of a church that never existed. I stepped back. The cold winter wind should have fought the fire, but instead it pushed past me like a person in a hurry. And I felt something move through me the way a draft will creep under a door. Not warm, not cold, only gone. There are no better words. By the time Dad's car pulled into the driveway, there was nothing left of the box but a skeleton of char and the vague outline of where it had sat for an hour. I wiped my eyes and carried Mr. Lank inside. The bathroom bulb flickered when I flipped it on. The dummy's eyes were clean, blue, calm as a lake. "Welcome home," I said to no one. The house felt lighter. I moved through each room like a priest after an exorcism, touching the corners, feeling stupid. I passed Dad's bedroom door. A note was taped to it. Thick lined paper. The kind Dad kept by the phone. "Logan buying you a new mattress. Back soon. Love. Dad." I smiled. I'm ashamed to admit I smiled. I opened the door to tell him he didn't have to. That I'd be fine tonight on the couch. That we could go together tomorrow and pick one out. The TV glowered blue without sound. Dad lay with one arm over the side of the bed. The first thought my brain offered was childlike. He fell asleep funny. Then I saw the note pinned to the back of his shirt with a sewing needle. The paper was a different kind, yellowed around the edges, with rigid block letters that pretended to be calm. "Don't you recognize your dad's handwriting?" It wasn't a question. It didn't have a question mark. It wasn't asking me to look closer. It was telling me what I already knew. This wasn't Dad's writing. It wanted me to doubt the thing my eyes said. I don't remember crossing the room. I don't remember calling 911. I don't remember the sirens. I remember the voicemail light on our landline blinking 15 times later that night because neighbors had called, and the hospital had called, and someone from church had called. They said words like condolences and anything you need, and one woman said he's in a better place, and I wanted to ask where that place keeps its boxes. I remember one other thing. When the paramedics pulled Dad from the bed, his palms were clean. No bruising on the knuckles. No defensive cuts. Whoever had done it as neatly as a seam. They never found anyone. The detectives added adjectives to the case file and ran out of them. Targeted. Specific. Personal. They liked those words because they were big and didn't have to mean anything. Uncle Brent died 2 days later. The obituary ran on page 7. The church did tuna casseroles the way the Midwest does grief. After the house was cleaned and boxed. After every sympathy card was opened and put in a shoebox for me to keep like proof that kindness had visited once. I went to the group home. There's an economy to it. I was 13. Too old for cute. Too young for work. People prefer babies and blank slates. I don't blame them. I kept Mr. Lank. The home's director watched me set him on the donated dresser and said, "I don't love that." And I said, "It was my dad's last present." And he blinked in the way people blink when they realize they are not going to win. He let me stay up late on Fridays when the little kids shrieked at movies. I practiced in front of the mirror. My lips kept still. I learned that grief is a ventriloquist act. You throw all the words into a different head and hope people won't hear that the voice is yours. Sometimes, after lights out, when the smaller kids were finally quiet and the older ones were calibrating their headphones, I'd sit on the bottom bunk with Mr. Lank on my knee. I'd talk in a whisper into the top bunk slats. "How was your day?" I'd ask him. "Fine." I'd answer. "Better than yesterday." It was therapy the home could afford. I didn't think about the box much, because thinking about it made the air in my chest too tight. But I thought about the eyes. I had cleaned away the black ink. I had seen them go from brown to blue. They weren't painted in a factory. They were glass. And behind the glass, something sat quietly and waited for me to make sense. One night, Lila, a small girl with a habit of stealing apples from the cafeteria and storing them under her pillow, asked if I'd perform for them all the next day. "A show," she said, as if the home were a theater and I were an actor instead of a boy with a toy. I said yes. She asked what Mr. Lang's favorite dessert was. I said, anything he doesn't have to chew. And she laughed so hard she hiccuped. The show was a hit if you can call a circle of kids on a carpet a hit. I made Mr. Lang tell bad jokes. I made him speculate at which staff member could win in a foot race. I let the toddler in the corner put a baseball cap on his plasticky hair. The director, to his credit, clapped louder than anyone. Encore, he said. So I gave them one more conversation, this time softer. The dummy turned his head and looked at me. You miss him? He asked in my voice. And I said, every day. And a few kids went very still in the way children do when they watch an adult be honest. After, when the carpet was just carpet and the kids were just kids again, I took the dummy back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed. If I ask you a question, I said, will you answer? Silence. Were you ever just plastic? Silence. Was he there? That night. The air moved. Not a voice. Just a presence. Like a door somewhere had opened. I stared at the dummy's blue eyes. They didn't blink. They didn't need to. The answer I got was the only one that would let me sleep. Yes and no. He was there, and he wasn't. The thing that peered through the box knew my father better than I did, and not at all. It wore faces like kids wear costumes. Belief is the zipper. Years passed. I aged out of the home. Got a job at a warehouse hauling boxes that became lighter the longer the shift went because your muscles negotiate with despair the way labor negotiates with management. I rented a studio that smelled like old smoke and ramen. I brought Mr. Lang with me because at that point it would have been weirder not to. I performed on weekends at children's parties for extra cash. Nobody cared that my dummy was older than their parents. I did clean jokes. I learned to improvise when the birthday kid cried. I learned to put the dummy in its case, not a box with red corners. Just a nylon suitcase I bought used at the thrift store, and zip it up after shows. Because when you're done throwing your voice, you need somewhere to put the echo. Now and then, at home, I'd catch myself staring into his eyes. I'd say, Dad, the way you say someone's name into a dark room to see if the room will answer with light. Sometimes I felt him there. Not a haunting, a proximity. It's a terrible kindness. The sense that the dead might still be sitting with you if you look at the one object that mattered the night they left. It's also an unbearable one. One winter evening, years after the fire, I walked past a pawn shop I hadn't noticed before. In the window sat a wooden box with red metal corners that looked exactly like the one I burned. The nick across the top was the same. My knees went weak. I stepped inside. The bell over the door made a sad grandma sound. Help you? The clerk asked without looking up from his phone. That box, I said, pointing. Antique. Came in last week. You collect? How much? He named a number too low for antique and too high for Lego. I stood there, heart loud in my throat. The box was empty. Of course it was. The lid was slightly ajar, as if the object inside had just stepped out for a cigarette. The red corners had tiny scratches like teeth marks in soft metal. I asked him where it came from. He shrugged. Guy brought it in with a bunch of estate junk. I walked outside and stood on the sidewalk and laughed. I laughed the way a man laughs when he just avoided stepping into traffic. I didn't buy it. I didn't need the box to learn the lesson it was offering. There are some containers you don't refill. There are some paths you don't walk twice. What the box held that night in my yard is not a spirit. It is a permission to be cruel or to be kind, and you hand it out every time you pick which voice to throw and where. I went home. I opened the nylon case. I set Mr. Lang on my knee and looked into his eyes. They were still blue. They were still calm. I said, I forgive you. Not sure who I was talking to. Maybe myself. For the fire. Maybe the thing in the box for being exactly what it was. Maybe the boy in me who still wanted to be applauded for hiding his lips while saying the thing he was most afraid to say. I made a choice that night. I booked more parties. I asked the group home if I could come by monthly and perform for the kids. I learned tricks that made shy kids brave. I let them sit with Mr. Lank and tug the string and see that the jaw opened only when I made it open and closed only when I let it. And every so often, when I look into his eyes, I feel my father looking back. Not trapped, not angry, just there. The way you feel the weight of a hand on your shoulder when you need to be reminded you're still upright. People ask if I ever got a new mattress. I did. It's firm. I sleep well most nights. On the nights I don't, I sit up with the dummy and talk until the room is light. And somewhere around 3 a.m., the house breathes and says enough. And I do too. If you want a moral, I don't have one you'll like. I don't think objects are evil. I think we are. Or we can be. I think we make boxes and put our worst in them, and then act surprised when the lid rattles at midnight. I think we teach ourselves to talk without moving our lips, because telling the truth out loud would make the world do more than clap. But I also think of Lila's hiccup laugh, and the way the toddlers clap with their whole bodies when the dummy takes a bow, and how the director at the home pretends to hate the act, and always asks for one more joke. I used to want to be a ventriloquist. Then something happened. I still am one. That's the whole horror of it. And the whole hope.